My name is Matt Coda, and welcome to the Development Review Board for April 28th, 2020. With me on the Development Review Board virtually is Don Filbert, John Wilking, Mark Baer, Alyssa Portman, Jim Langdon, Brian Sullivan, not present at the moment, but if he joins, we'll welcome him soon. Also in attendance from the City of South Burlington, Amara Lakeen, Development Review Planner, and Delilah Hall, Zoning Administrator. Welcome to the Development Review Board meeting. First of all, we'd start out with additions, deletions, or changes in the order of agenda items. And I do have a change. If anyone else on the board has a change, please let me know. But I want to reverse 2 and 3 because I'd like to give an announcement for those that are new to this process on how this is happening virtually, why it's happening virtually, and what we're doing, and then go to the public comments not related to the agenda before we go to the one agenda item that we have tonight, which is a sketch plan for a master plan. So to start with the announcement, this is our 4th meeting that the Development Review Board has had virtually using the GoToMeeting application. And I'd like to think I'm getting better at this process. There's always room for improvement, and happily take suggestions on how to do that. For those members of the public, similar to when we meet in City Hall, I will ask for public comment after any plan that is brought forward, any proposal after we've discussed, and provide anyone that requests a turn with 3 minutes to speak. If you cannot add comments, either over the phone or through the GoToMeeting app or through the chat box, we understand. You can also send an email, send it to myself, mcoda@esperl.com, or to Marla Keen, mkeen@esperl.com. And I read every email that comes to us, as does, I know, the rest of the board. To that end, I want to acknowledge the receipt of several emails, 9 in fact, about the decision that this board has made to continue to hold meetings despite the COVID-19 pandemic. 6 emails I would categorize as supportive of our efforts to keep the DRB functioning. And just to list those off rather than to read them all, those include emails from John Simpson, Sandy Dooley, William Embeck, Tyler Barnes, Leslie Black, and Pam McKenzie. 3 emails asking us to stop meeting were from Roseanne Greco, Claudia Miller, and Janet Bellavance. Now, all of these emails and any new ones that come in are part of the DRB public record, will be posted with the agendas as supplemental, as all emails are when they're received by myself or Marla or the city staff, anyone else on the city staff, and be put in as a supplemental part of the public records packet. So if you've written to us, thank you. We've read them and we'll post them so everyone can read them. And we continue to urge you, if you have a comment about either a particular proposal that is under consideration or to our conduct, happily send it in and we'll read them. But the board can discuss the comments further under the other business, which is agenda number 5. But I do want to give a brief explanation. I promise it'll be brief. For those that may not have had a chance to review the minutes or the recording of our virtual meeting on March 17th, or April 7th, or April 21st. This is our 4th time. So to reiterate, we all understand that COVID-19 is having a significant impact on all of our lives. We're in an extraordinary time. I think we can all agree about that, where safety requires us to maintain physical distance from one another. But it was my decision, after consulting with each individual board member and city staff, that we cannot suspend our responsibilities and allow this virus to grind the gears of government to a halt. A competent, responsive government is essential, perhaps now more than ever. And I acknowledge that this is different for many of us. For some at home right now and not sitting on the hard chairs of City Hall, this might be better. But for some, the technological challenge might be significant, and I understand that, and I appreciate that. It may be a challenge for some people that they would prefer to be in City Hall. I would prefer to be at City Hall. But I want to say that city staff, including Paul Connor, Delilah Hall, Marla Keeney, Kevin Dorn, just name a few, have been doing a remarkable job ensuring that public has access to the documents and that open meeting law is followed under the procedures approved by the legislature and signed into law by Governor Scott in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, I would prefer to meet in person. I suspect this online meeting, whether it's in higher education or local government or in business, will be part of our way of life for some time to come, although I'd be very eager to be back in City Hall. So that's the reason why we're meeting. That's our process. And now I would like to open it up to comments and questions from the public that's not related to the agenda. So this is not related to the sketch plan or the master plan of the O'Brien property that we're considering, but any comments at all not related to the agenda. And as I will when I ask for public comments, when we discuss proposals, I'll ask you to either state your name or write in the chat box. Once you state your name, I'll write it down, give everyone an opportunity to speak for 3 minutes. But rather than giving everyone a turn because I can't recognize you, I'll ask you to state your name and I'll call on you individually. So anyone on the phone or using the GoToMeeting app, if you'd like to speak on something not related to the agenda, please state your name.
Yes, Michael Mittag.
Okay, Michael, thank you. Anyone else that would like to offer a comment not related to the agenda?
Barbara Service.
Hi, Barbara. I'm going to look. Anyone else in the audience? Okay, I'm looking at the chat box. I don't see anything. So I see 2. I hear 2. So we'll start with Michael.
Yes.
Go ahead, Michael.
Good evening, Matt and other members of the DRB. Some of what I was planning to say, you might have mentioned already. We all know that the Vermont open meeting law was recently amended to facilitate online meetings like this one. So while it is perfectly legal to have this hearing tonight, in my view, it is by no means the right thing to do. The O'Brien Brothers application that you plan to consider tonight is no run-of-the-mill development proposal. It is a huge, complex project and will have major impacts on the community. Residents are already gun shy when they hear about any proposed O'Brien Brothers development because they were somewhat or completely blindsided and shocked by the environmental destruction wrought by the O'Brien Brothers on the land between Old Farm Road and Kennedy Drive that was completely deforested. In fact, members of the community have approached me and said they cannot believe that the O'Brien family would do or allow such devastation on their land. So this is not a run-of-the-mill proposal, and as such, I think all residents deserve the opportunity to weigh in and have their concerns and opinions heard by the DRB and the developer. Many residents are almost fully occupied with keeping themselves and their families safe from the coronavirus, working from home, homeschooling their children, looking after their elderly parents, and so on. And many have been severely affected, both physically, mentally, emotionally, and financially, and some have lost family or friends. Under these trying circumstances, they do not have the time or the energy to participate here tonight as they would wish. This is not an auspicious time to have this complicated project heard. The socially and environmentally responsible thing for the DRB, and more pertinently for O'Brien Brothers to do, is to continue this hearing until such time as the public can participate in a live, open DRB meeting. You all owe it to the community we share. Why is there such a rush to jam this application through under the cover of the darkness that the pandemic has brought down upon us? Why? I do not understand it. And then it's worth remembering that the development value of these lands and others doesn't increase because of didn't increase because of some brilliant strategy implemented by members of the O'Brien family. They owned the land, or maybe they inherited it and held onto it and waited. The increase in value over time comes largely from the surrounding community, which paid for and continues to pay for roads, sewer lines, water supply, public works department, fire department.
So we're at 3 minutes, Michael. If you could wrap up, I appreciate it.
Police, schools, parks, and other amenities. You owe the community some consideration for that. While land ownership in this country is absolute, there's still a social and environmental public interest which many landowners respect, I beg your pardon. Your social responsibility is to do nothing which will harm the social fabric of our community, and your environmental responsibility is to do nothing which will harm the natural environment and exacerbate the threat from climate change. Please, please continue this hearing until there can be a meaningful public participation and input. I'm not asking the DRB to not to meet on other matters, but this particular development proposal is not ordinary. And I think that is a matter that you should consider carefully to give the community.
Thank you for your concerns, Michael. Thank you very much. Barbara, you're next.
I wish I had written something as eloquent as what Michael just said. He said clearly all of the things that I have been thinking. I have now attended, I believe, 2 DRB meetings by GoToMeeting. I do not find it, and I am a reasonably fluent technology user, but there are too many people in our community who don't have access to technology, who are busy taking care of children and schooling them at home, who are taking care of elderly parents who can't get out, who are making sure that their neighbors are safe, who are taking care of those who need services. And I think that to look at this project is absolutely irresponsible on the part of the DRB. Like Michael said, I have to tell you, I was appalled when I came back and saw what happened to that particular piece of property. And I would hope that the DRB would not make the same mistake a second time. I do not begrudge them their right to make a dollar. I begrudge what they are doing to our environment, what they are doing to our community, the demands they are creating, et cetera. And so I would hope that the DRB would continue this until the community really has a chance to respond. A couple of us are here. A lot of people, I know you have heard from others who have particularly addressed this particular piece. And I have to tell you, I was impressed with some of the discussions of other properties where the questions asked were good, the discussion was good, and I could easily see on my computer the things you were discussing. That's not true with this particular project. And there are lots of voices in the community that are concerned about this particular issue. So I would implore you, and I believe that you even established a special meeting tonight to particularly address this issue. I also find that just inexcusable in this time when our community, and I have to tell you, I am proud to be a Vermonter and what Vermonters are doing in response to this pandemic. But I also see the toll that it is taking on people for us to be responsible. And being responsible tonight is staying home and doing other things that are closer to their hearts, even though they love the community in which we live. And so I would, again, implore you to continue this until there is time for expansive conversation. Not that you won't get to the same point, but that you will get there where the community understands it and has a chance to speak about it, rather than doing it in the sort of cloak of secrecy of a meeting that's not accessible to a lot of people due to time, due to other demands, due to illness, due to the crisis that's going on in our country and in our community. So I would ask you again to continue this discussion to a future date. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. Okay.
Matt, couldn't you take one more?
Yeah, who is that just popped in?
It's Sarah Dopp.
Hey, Sarah, how are you?
Hi. Fine, thank you.
Go ahead. Go ahead. You have 3 minutes, Sarah.
Pardon me?
You have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't need 3 minutes. Michael and Barbara have both said it very well. I simply want the record to show that I endorse what they said 150%. I've written a letter to the editor of the other paper that covers these same points, and I trust that it will be in the paper soon. I just couldn't agree with what they said anymore. And I want to be on record as saying the same as they have said. There's absolutely no need for this speed. It really does smack of trying to do something under the table, and I really don't like that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sarah.
Oh,
okay.
I'm sorry. One other thing. I did want to ask, isn't this covered by interim zoning or not?
Okay, thank you for that, Sarah. It is not covered by interim zoning. This isn't the Southeast Quadrant. If it were covered by interim zoning, the city council would determine whether or not it would go forward to the development review board by a vote. And so because it's not part of the Southeast Quadrant, which is not part of interim zoning, it doesn't fall into that category. This is not a special meeting. This is a continued meeting. It was because of those concerns that Michael and Barbara illustrated that we wanted to make sure that people had ample notice, that people could participate, that we did not want to continue this sketch plan of a master plan, very preliminary, that we did not want to do it at 10:30, 10:45 at night because it was at the end of the agenda. It was the decision of staff and the DRB to ensure that the public could participate, those that it's past their bedtime, that it was done with 2 weeks notice and done at the 7 o'clock hour rather than the 11 o'clock hour. So I don't understand that comment at all whatsoever. And furthermore, we take on projects without fear or favor. We can't decide what projects are controversial or not controversial before we even see them. And to do so would be to prejudge them, which would be wrong. And that's not what we're doing here tonight. I've received several emails, 6 emails, in fact, from people who are very supportive of this effort to keep DRB moving, to not stop the gears of government, because it is critical at this time that we continue to have a competent government. It is essential, and that's what we're doing here tonight. So thank you very much for your comments, but that is our decision. Okay, so let's move on to item number 4, which is continued sketch plan application SD of O'Brien Farm Road LLC for a master plan and a plan unit development to develop 82.9 acres with a maximum of 415 dwelling units, up to 1,285,000 square feet of commercial space and 22.1 acres of open space, and to realign the north end of Old Farm Road at 500 Old Farm Road. Who is here for the applicant?
Evan Langfeld, CEO of O'Brien Brothers.
Hi, Evan. Anyone else with you?
Andrew Gill,
Excuse me.
Director of Development.
Hey,
Andrew Gill. Sorry, can you guys hear me?
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, we got you, Andrew. Thank you. And I would like to remind members of the board, the staff, and the public, and the applicant, that this is a sketch plan. This is a sketch plan of a master plan. And the sketch plan is a high-level review and discussion where the applicant receives feedback from the board on major elements of the project before it is fully designed. During this meeting, we may provide oral guidance to the applicant, which constitutes the board's determination that the application meets the purposes of the land development regulations. These comments are helped to guide the applicant to a later application that meets the LDR requirements and contributes to the goals of the comprehensive plan. This is not a formal hearing, and it does not result in a binding decision. We may choose to continue the meeting, as we did 2 weeks ago, to a later date, or 3 weeks ago, if there are questions that remain to be examined. The future date will be announced prior to concluding this item for the evening. Upon conclusion of the sketch plan meeting, an applicant who wishes to move forward with the project will have to submit a complete application. This is not a complete application. The next level of review includes additional public notices and a formal public hearing. Reminder, the sketch plan is a master plan. A master plan is a dynamic long-term planning document that provides a conceptual layout to future growth and development. We're here to provide guidance in what is a very preliminary proposal for developing this piece of property in South Burlington. It needs to be, and we're giving advice on what needs to be refined in order to comply with South Burlington's land development regulations. This will allow staff, the board, and the public an opportunity to provide input and recommendations, and I hope the public does. So on April 7th, we went through 16 different items before we made the determination that we wanted to make sure that everyone was awake, because this is a big project. So we moved to today's date. So we're going to pick up where we left off on April 7th with item number 17. But before we do that is, yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah. I was just going to say, John Wilking, I need to recuse myself. We own property across the street from where this is occurring.
So we have a recusal. Brian Sullivan, did you jump in while we were talking earlier? No. Okay, but we do have, with John recused, we still have Jim, Alyssa, Mark, and Don and myself. So we have a quorum. Okay, is there anything the applicant would like to say before we jump into item number 17?
Yeah, so this is Evan Langfeld. Just really quickly, in advance of addressing the staff comments, I just wanted to address a couple of the previous public comments, and just on a high level, in terms of the existing hillside development, just to be clear, our permitting process on that development, which is consistent and compliant with the existing land development regulations, it was an 18-month process. So by no means did we surprise anybody through that permitting process. And then secondly, on the second phase, this design in various iterations, but largely consistent with what we are proposing, has been in the works for years and has been discussed in various public settings and also with planning and zoning staff. So, and it's also, again, compliant with the existing regulations. So we're not proposing anything that is somehow running amok and trying to do this under the cover of night. So while I understand that everybody has a difference of opinion, and we understand this is a big project, it's of a scale that definitely, garners a lot of attention, we're certainly not trying to push this through under the cover of night. And in fact, I would say that while some people probably have a difference of opinion that maybe not meeting in City Hall may not be as open to the public, I would argue that there's many people that think this is actually a more open and public setting, because many people have working jobs or kids at school that don't allow them to come and sit at City Hall in the evening. So I'll rest on that, but understand that the O'Brien organization, the O'Brien family, has no interest in trying to push something through under the cover of night.
Thank you for that, Evan. Could I proceed?
Yep.
Is that all right with everybody? Okay. 17, we pick off on roadways, access, circulation, and traffic management. And if we I don't know if we want to look at what map we want to look at, but staff considers, Evan and Andrew, that the roadway layout to be the most significant elements of this application, and recommends that we discuss with you the following elements of the roadway layout. To reiterate what was mentioned above, each of these elements represents a sizable project and warrants full consideration by the board. So let's talk a little bit about the layout of the roads: Old Farm Road and Heinsberg Road, Old Farm Road and Kimball Avenue, and northern mixed commercial and residential blocks, and the dead end streets. So walk us through the layout here, if you could, Andrew or Evan, of the roadways.
Yeah, so I can just sort of give you a general overview and then jump into the particular questions and comments from the staff. So the map that you're looking at is the map of the street network. It's actually a fairly straightforward street network. The main sort of concepts of it, probably the most significant aspect, is the rerouting of Old Farm Road to become a four-way intersection a little bit further from Kennedy Drive, which has sort of been done for a variety of reasons, primarily to ensure for a safe access with it's probably most likely going to be signalized, would allow for turn lanes in and out of the project, and also would allow some space between, this intersection and the Kennedy intersection. I don't know if anyone's ever tried to turn left off of Old Farm Road at 5 o'clock at night, but it doesn't really work. And so that's
Andrew,
sort of the
sorry
driving
to interrupt.
force.
Andrew, the changing of Old Farm Road is just at the intersection of Kimball, or is it also
So
on
if
other
you're
parts
looking
of
at-
Old Farm Road?
If you're looking at the map that's up right now, essentially Old Farm Road in its existing state is the full green section, and where it starts to turn red is where it realigns. And so essentially it would, as it's currently running, it would go kind of straight up the page, just kind of continue straight towards Kimball Avenue. But this reroute would turn it to the right and sort of realign it with some of the, I think it aligns with the access across the street, but I might be mistaken about that. And then the green section of Old Farm Road that you're looking at is where Old Farm Road is currently, but there would be some improvements proposed to the road in that area. We can talk about those in the context of the traffic control or concerns. That was one of the staff comments. I think it might be the first one. And this is the first staff comment, 17A, Old Farm Road and Heinsberg Road. There'd been discussion by the applicant of offsite mitigation at the intersection of Heinsberg Road and Old Farm Road. And that was a conversation that we had previously. This plan sort of leaves the intersection at Heinsberg Road and Old Farm Road alone, which you can't see on this drawing, but it would be sort of off the bottom of the page. We had met preliminarily, and we're working with Lamoureux and Dickinson, with Roger Dickinson as a traffic planner. And we had some sort of preliminary conversations with him, and basically the consensus was that improvements at that intersection weren't going to have as much impact as sort of traffic calming measures we could put in along Old Farm Road. And so one of the exhibits that we had submitted to the board was a letter from Lamoureux and Dickinson that sort of outlaid 5 or 6 different traffic calming measures. We haven't identified exactly which ones would be put in at this point, but some of the concepts are sort of a neck down to a one-way intersection. It's called a chicane, I think, the traffic term. And that was one consideration. So essentially where you went from white to green on this plan, you would have a 2-way stop and a 1-way pass through, so that cars coming either direction would have to alternate passing through a 1-way sort of neck down. That was one option. There were raised crosswalks. There were, sort of landscaped island bump outs, a bunch of different aspects that were in that packet that we're sort of exploring, and we'll put together at the next level of review sort of an outline of exactly what would be planned and what we think it would be effective. But the gist there was that we absolutely are aware of the cut-through traffic on Old Farm Road, and we're aware of the sort of safety concern that that poses for people. And so, you know, when we had looked at in the application, I don't have the facts right in front of me, but are they likely, so our project, when we looked preliminarily, and this was in the letter that Roger Dickinson sent, 2% of external residential and 5% of external commercial trips from our project are projected to use Old Farm Road heading towards Heinsberg Road. So it's a very small percentage of the trips that we're generating are going to head that direction, because primarily folks are heading to other larger areas of the city. And so but regardless of the fact that our project isn't going to be sending a ton of traffic in that direction, there's an existing problem here that we're sort of committed to fixing. And so that's what the proposal I put forward to add these traffic calming measures is meant to address.
So Andrew,
Sorry
sorry to cut you off. Andrew, you were talking about the traffic calming measures as discussed in the staff comments are more related to Heinsberg Road than to Kimball Avenue, or do I have that wrong?
So previously we talked with staff about re-engineering the intersection of Heinsberg Road and Old Farm Road. Because right now there's kind of this like big sort of off-ramp looking exit off of Heinsberg Road. If you've ever come from like Tilly Drive and you're heading toward, you're heading that direction, there's this like big, wide, sweeping off-ramp kind of to go up Old Farm Road. And so one thing we talked about was sort of necking that down and creating, you know, more of a tight right turn to get onto Old Farm Road.
As a traffic calming measure.
Exactly, to sort of discourage
so people don't fly
out
out of Heinsberg and then go. Yeah, okay, I get you.
Exactly. But what we kind of came to as a conclusion was that, you know, folks make a slightly more complicated right turn and then have a straightaway shot down Old Farm Road. You're not really going to get to the end that you're looking for. Whereas a variety of these different measures, you know, stop signs, raised speed tables, speed humps, chicanes, bump outs of landscaping and trees, narrowing of the road, you know, a range of those things along the road will make it slow enough and unattractive enough that folks will just understand that that's not a great way to cut through.
Yeah, Old Farm Road, this is Evan again. Old Farm Road has long been a deficient road, and I think by everybody's measure. There have been accidents there where pedestrians have been hit over the years. And it's primarily because you have basically what becomes a cut through for a very heavily trafficked Kennedy Drive in Kimball to get to the east side, so going towards Williston. And without some sort of traffic calming measures, it's going to be continue to be a high speed commuter cut through. And so what we're proposing is to provide those traffic measures and then also provide a much better access onto Kimball Ave by creating distance between the Kennedy intersection and the new Old Farm Road access onto Kimball. Right now,
Yeah.
you know, Old Farm Road predated Kennedy and it predated Kimball, so that's why you have this deficient intersection.
And I know that we've had further discussions with other properties south of there about figuring out how to ensure pedestrian walkway through there. And I'm sure Bike and Ped would be interested in hearing your thoughts on how they could do that, even though they're not formally meeting. You certainly should reach out to the chairs and discuss, you know, when you talk about that intersection, ways to make it safe for people to walk, run, you know, from that area down towards the north of Heinsberg Road.
Absolutely. I think we're currently proposing sidewalks along Old Farm Road and, you know, rec path connectivity through there. And we're also, you know, the sort of short answer to question 17A is that in our preliminary plat, we'll have a comprehensive proposal for dealing with calming traffic on Old Farm Road. It'll be specific, it'll be mapped out, and it will be something that we think achieves that end. And it might incorporate the improvements to the Heinsberg and Old Farm intersection if it's determined, you know, through the preliminary development of the preliminary plat plans that would be beneficial. We're not opposed to it. It's just that we had been advised preliminarily it would be more effective to look at some other tools. And so we're starting there.
Andrew, this
So
is Dawn.
Yeah, go ahead, Don. Good.
This is Dawn here. Chicane, is that essentially like an old, how an old covered bridge works? One car goes through and then another car goes through?
Yeah, exactly. It's like a one-way bridge, basically,
Is that
except
actually
there's no
used-
bridge.
Is that actually still used in communities?
Yeah, so the recommendations I believe that we provided were from a book, a land planning book, like New Urban Street Design or something along those lines. I could look up what exactly it was, but it is it's a more modern tool, actually.
Okay.
There's been a
It's
bunch
coming
of
back
these
into
sort of-
favor.
Okay, thank you.
Before we move on to the circulation inside the development, is there any other board members that want to comment on how we're connecting Old Farm Road to Kimball Avenue or Heinsberg Road?
So I think there was a little bit more staff comment about sorry, this is Marla, about the Old Farm Road, Kimball Avenue.
Yeah, my
So
question would be why there? Why that right turn there? But go ahead, Marla. Sorry to cut you off.
So the staff comment was to talk about why it's a divided road as opposed to a regular road at the Kimball Avenue end, but I'm certainly open to talking about the alignment as well.
What do you mean by divided?
So,
Can you explain that?
Delilah, can you flip back to something that shows the road?
It's a parkway design, basically, for part of the
Yeah.
road.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
Let me get back to it.
Yeah, and that PowerPoint that we had sent in had it laid out sort of with your comments as well. but-
Marla, is that PowerPoint in the old packet?
It's
packet?
in both.
It's in both?
Yep.
Is it-
So the one for this meeting has like sort of a part B, and that is a PDF of the PowerPoint.
Oh, yes,
There you
this is,
go.
yeah. So which page was it? Let me go to 17.
I think you're on page 16 or 7. Yep, next one, the next page. Yeah, there you go. Up,
Okay,
back one up from there.
okay.
I
So
don't know
the
if you can
divide
zoom in
starts
at all
at
on
Kimball and then goes up a certain. How far does it go up the divided roadway?
So the split roadway goes up probably about, I don't have a numbered plan from you, probably about 400 or 500 feet up the hill as a divided highway. And so that is this road section that's shown here. If you zoom in on the bottom of the slide, you can see there's basically a large landscape median, 24 feet, two 20-foot one-way roads, 11-foot green belts, and sidewalks on each side. And this is sort of, the theory here that staff question was, how come it was done, and it was purely for aesthetic reasons. So we wanted to have a big green median. We've been talking with Wagner and Hodgson about how to landscape that and how to program that. There's been some really cool ideas put forward about sort of creating like a stormwater creek bed style feature with some cool landscaping in it. That was the reason. And so, it could certainly be not a divided roadway, but we liked it for the aesthetic benefit of it. It's sort of a grand entrance to the community. And this particular area, that first 500 feet, is a highly structured, more densely scaled area. And so the buildings and things that would surround that are more urban, 3 or 4 story apartment, mixed use, commercial, retail style development that would be fronting on this greenway. That sort of the overall impact is what we had in mind in that area.
So to echo Andrew's points, the Kimball Ave entrance is entering into the C1 LR zone as opposed to the R12 zone, which is coming off of Kennedy. And so we thought this was a more appropriate kind of grand entrance because it is going into the commercial center and the mixed use center. And so, we're open to staff comments. We're open to DPW's comments. We just thought from an aesthetic standpoint, this was appropriate.
Yeah, I don't know if does the board have any comments on the aesthetics versus. I'm interested in what DPW and the fire chief says, but I I like the aesthetics. I think it's fine. I don't, does the board have any comments or staff on a divided road on the Kimball?
This is Marla. I don't think staff has an opinion strongly about it being divided. I do want to dig a little bit more into 20-foot drive aisles on both sides. You know, if that were a non-divided road, the pavement width would be 32 maximum. So looking at 40 feet of pavement seems a little excessive at first glance. So that might be something we want to take a closer look at before the next stage of the review. But the dividedness of it isn't, you know, objectionable on the face of it.
I think
So this is
we're
Dawn.
open. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Don.
So this is Dawn. When the divided part ends, I can't remember. I was looking at it this afternoon. Does the road become narrower?
Yes.
Because you're losing, was it 24 feet?
Yeah, the road would probably change to a 24-foot wide road, and then, you know, which I think is what, I'm not 100% sure. We probably have it in the slides what Old Farm Road is in terms of its current width.
Okay.
But it does neck down. It
Okay.
would neck down essentially to the existing width of Old Farm Road, which is likely 24 or 28 feet.
Okay. And then you'd have sidewalk in addition to that.
We're putting new sidewalks along Old Farm Road in front of the developed areas, which is the majority of the road, except for the lot we don't own.
Okay. Thank you.
Alyssa, Jim, or Mark, any comment about that intersection?
Yeah, Matt. I don't have much of a comment in regards to how it's sort of necking or how it's realigning. I think it's good to pull it away from the intersection at Kennedy, because yes, you know, I've used Old Farm Road, and you know the proximity to Kennedy does become problematic. So I have no problem with the right-hand turn. I like the boulevard design. I think it is an interesting way, especially as an entrance into the project from Kimball. But I agree, it needs to neck down before it actually gets to Kimball, or else you're going to run into the confusion that I know I've seen coming off, heading north on Heinsberg and turning left on Kennedy. I've seen people turn into the oncoming traffic and drive down that divided boulevard. So I think necking down well before you get down to Kimball, so it's just a standard 24-foot, and then it divides further up to eliminate that confusion. But I like the idea with the green belts in the middle, and you know, the ability to do some interesting landscaping features in there.
But doesn't your plan have the boulevard design go all the way to Kimball at this point? This is Dawn.
It does, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
So
I'd
that's good
reconsider
feedback.
looking at that.
That's something that we can certainly ask about. I mean, I don't, you know, it also, you know, another piece that'll play into this would be the bike lane desire, you know, I know that I think in the existing phase 1, we have a bike lane on one side of the road coming off of Kennedy. So there might be some bike lanes and things that have to get incorporated into this road profile as well. So we can look at all of that. One other, I wanted to mention that we did reach out to Bike and Ped and the Park and Rec committees, both. And so I think we're on with one in a couple of weeks, and hopefully we'll be on with the other as well.
Great. That'd be great if you did that. Any other comments from staff or the board regarding the intersection, either at Old Farm Road intersection with Kennedy Drive, or with Heinsberg Road, or Kimball Avenue, or Heinsberg Road? If not, Evan and Andrew, if you talk a little bit about the next comments with regards to congestion circulation,
Hey, Matt,
as they relate.
Matt, this is
Yeah, go
Marla.
ahead.
Sorry. So there are several other comments about roads. So we've kind of talked about Old Farm Road at both ends. There's a lot of comments on dead end streets, and then something about
No. That's what I was wanted to get to that now. Yeah.
Oh, okay,
I just
I'm
wanted to. I just wanted to, if anyone had any other comments on the board about the Kimball Avenue we deal with the sides first, and then we'll go inside. So the further comments dealing with the commercial and residential blocks and the dead end streets. Staff notes that the buildings must be on streets and recommends the board ask the applicant how they plan to lay out these blocks to meet this criterion and whether the additional streets are needed. In regards to dead end streets, staff recommends the board consider whether the dead end street between the residential section and the mixed commercial residential area east of Old Farm Road should connect to the eastern loop off of Old Farm Road. And there's some more comments regarding dead end streets, but let's first talk about the commercial and residential blocks. Evan or Andrew?
Yeah, so we provided these two sort of like schematic designs of the commercial areas. These are not final designs, you know, by any means. They're sort of studies that had been done as to what could fit where and what sorts of uses and types of buildings could fit in the framework that we're creating here. We provided those, you know, as sort of a transparent, you know, this is what something could look like. Is it exactly what we're going to propose? You know, probably not. I think, you know, working through some of this, even in the past 3 weeks, you know, we've found issues with how things are lining up or exactly how things might need to be oriented. I think, you know, one sort of question that jumped out at us looking at this was the requirement to be on streets. I think we sort of might need a little clarification as to what streets to sort of be considering and to sort of where that requirement spelled out. You know, we've sort of suffered from this even in the current project, you know, where we'll have buildings that have streets on three sides. And so, you know, which, you know, here in these layouts, you can see, you know, one prominent building is lined up with Kennedy Drive and Kimball Avenue. Others are lined up with the new, you know, the new Old Farm Road realignment and the curve O'Brien Farm Road extension. You know, you can see sort of parking being shielded, you know, and sort of tucked away in the middle. You know, we sort of had thought those were in line with the sort of overall goals of the regulations. But, you know, certainly open to feedback on these layouts to sort of, you know, move into the next phase of the process.
It's worth noting too on the Kimball Kennedy frontage. So with that large building, which is, you know, anticipated that at some point down the line, maybe there's some sort of community scale grocery store that could service the development as well as the broader community. We have it oriented so it fronts on Kennedy and on Kimball, but you do have parking to the side and rear of it, which we believe is applicable or allowable via the existing LDRs. And then we fronted those two retail pads along the new Old Farm Road right there. But what I was going to point out is that there is a pretty significant grade change from Kimball to that parking area. And so that's why we fronted along the new Old Farm Road, because we thought that was kind of the prominent and sort of the spirit of the regulation is to have it along the prominent drive. So you are shielding the parking area. So, you know, again, to Andrew's point, we're all ears to what staff thinks, you know, is kind of askew with the regulations here.
Marla?
Yep. So looking at these concepts, you know, it's lots that front on more than one street are rather complicated. The regulations allow for through lots for parking to be on the side that is more minor, or in the case of a through lot to the interstate, to be on the interstate side. So I guess there would have to be determination made on which is the more major street, and the parking could be to the rear relative to that street. You know, I think that staff comments were based on the idea that these are rather large lots and kind of questioning whether, you know, they were intended for one building per lot. And if so, then okay. But if they were going to be lots with multiple buildings on them, it was going to be difficult to get multiple buildings facing the street.
I think it's an interesting point. So I think here we're sort of, and in general, and maybe, you know, we could take the temperature of you guys on it. You know, we view the new roads that we're constructing to be the primary roads, you know, for buildings that are on those roads. And we would view sort of Kimball and Kennedy drives to be, you know, like if you're looking at the picture that's on the bottom of this frame, you know, you've got major orientation to a new road, and you've also got major orientation to the existing, you know, Kimball Avenue. And so we sort of seem to be balancing, sort of orienting the building towards the roadways that are there. On the upper picture, you know, we have to pick having a building oriented toward Kimball or toward our new road. And I think in that scenario, we're picking the new road because we're creating that structured space with the project. And so we wouldn't want to have the building orient to the non-pedestrian scale Kimball Avenue. And so that's sort of why those are getting drawn up toward that side. I mean, so I guess in terms of, it would be good to sort of understand that guidance as to which is the main, you know, how should we be viewing the main road? I mean, yes, Kennedy Drive probably has more traffic than the new roads in our project, but it's still not really the primary. Does that make sense? Like, I guess clarifying what Marla's saying so we can sort of have that in our mind, but to us, this felt like the right balance of orienting toward existing streets and shielding parking from view as much as possible, but also sort of engaging with the new streets that we're building.
So this is Marla. I'm going to draw on this a little bit. Let's see, way in. Let's see if I can.
Bigger, Marla?
I'm good, actually. I just zoomed in on mine. So this is, there we go. This is the lot line, the interior lot lines here. So I think, Delilah, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is something that we as a department spend a lot of time talking about when there's a building that has multiple frontages, which is the primary street. So I think this is an instance where the board's feedback would be really valuable is,
Yes.
you know, if this is the configuration, which side is the principal side that the parking has to be behind?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Marla. Now I understand the comment better. Is there a better, or is this a map? This is the best one, right? Of the
You can
commercial
zoom in
lots
on
of that
their own
corner.
screen, Matt. Everyone can zoom in on their own screen to their desire without messing up the main picture here.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Great. Well,
So
I assume but I can't point to it, can I? Or can I take the drawing tool?
Yeah, you can get to the drawing tools at the top of the page and use the drawing tools.
The drawing tools are, oh, I see them. So this one would assume, I would assume, oops, shoot, didn't work. Choose pen color. Pen, not pointer. This, I would assume, is the front, right? Or this, or is it? I don't know. This is a great question.
That
I
is
don't know
a
what the front
front.
is. That is a
There's
front.
also a front at Kennedy.
Yeah.
Right. So the corner lot there has two fronts. The one on the right hand side, it has a front on Kimball and has a front on Old Farm. And that one's not so bad because that's two fronts and it still has a side. It has two sides. So the parking can be to the side of the building. The one that becomes problematic is the big one at the top of the page that has three fronts. So it has the front on this new street that bends, and then it has the front on Kennedy and the front on Kimball. So then this is something I can just imagine in 2 months when they're getting ready to submit their preliminary plat and we're sitting in the office and trying to figure out, okay, which is the side? This is the through lot. The LDRs allow parking to the rear of the principal front in the case of a through lot. So which is the principal front here?
And yeah, It's tough. And because that entrance is sort of being beefed up to be sort of a grander entrance, it's, you know, it's a question.
I mean,
What is a change from
we
Kimball?
might,
Evan and Andrew, what is that grade change from Kimball down to into the lot?
yeah, so there is a significant drop. You would not be able to see the parking from Kimball Avenue. That I can tell you with certainty. It's probably 20 or 25 feet up a bank, you know, just like the corner of Kennedy and Kimball is currently. I don't know if you've ever sort of sat there and looked at it, but there is a very steep bank up to sort of a plateau. And that feature, you know, is there here as well. There would be, and so that parking would not be visible. We've done a section view of it, and it's not visible from Kimball Avenue. And so that was sort of the theory with it, was you can't see it, so it's probably a good spot for it.
But then, Andrew,
No,
it
but
would be
this is-
visible from the new street on the
It
bottom.
certainly would, and yeah, I think, you know, part of this, I think we could look at sort of the lotting on this as well, and that might help clarify, you know, if there were more lots instead of just that one large lot, then they would each have more of a distinct front, and that could potentially eliminate the third front from that back lot if there was another lot in between it, right?
But if your programming dictates you need a lot this size with this size building and that size parking, just splitting it into two lots for sort of administrative purposes doesn't solve anything, because you still can't have parking to the front of a building. So you'd have to have
I think it's a
development program that puts a building on the front, on the new front of that lot.
And Marla, is it the
I think
big
it's
building that you're most concerned about? Like, is this
Mhm.
this would have to be the front of the building in order for you to have parking here, right?
Right. But then
And this
if,
isn't, there's not a natural walkway for people that are parking here to use this store or whatever it is.
but if this is the front, the purple line here, then the parking would have to be to the rear. And so it'd be the opposite of what they have.
Yeah, I see what you guys are getting at, and I do think that, like I said initially, this was a sort of exercise in sort of how things could be laid out, and I think that we can do another exercise in how things can be laid out and probably come up with something that addresses this question. And so I would say that, you know, the lot lines in this area might change a little bit before the preliminary plat submission, but we'll keep in mind this requirement and sort of help to get something through that sort of maybe makes a little more sense. And we might, you know, seek some input from staff along the way too.
It's worth noting though, as you're coming around that bend, what you're not seeing here, which is on the left side of that upper picture, is that there is a large multifamily building that's turning a corner right there. So
Very interesting. I mean, it's a nice development they're trying to do there.
I'm sorry. I'm not on mute.
Please mute your phone if you're not on the board or an applicant at this time until public comment period.
So
Thank
as
you.
you're coming through the intersection to come off of Kennedy and up Two Brothers Drive, you would then take a left. I don't have the control, but you would take a left along that bend that runs along that parking lot for the large grocer that's along Kimball and Kennedy there. So you are essentially bookended by buildings. You do have a span as you're going around that corner where there is not a building there. But I'm quite honestly, I mean, from just a logistical standpoint, I'm not sure how you would have building surrounding all of that roadway when you're trying to create, through roads through a new development of this scale. I don't know how you shield. At some point you have to pick the main arterial roads and choose those as the ones that are most important to shield. And so we've made some subjective decisions. Again, we're open to commentary on this, but at some point a decision has to be made as to which are the most important roadways. And we
this is Marla. I think what you're saying is consistent with board's comments or with staff comments that, there has to be a decision for through lots on which is the principal front. That only applies to through lots. Lots that are not through lots, there can be no parking in the front, period.
I just drew a blue box where the building is. So that's the building that's proposed that we're going to be talking about on May 19th. There is building here and building here, you know, and there's building here. So there's this one sort of open area currently. Like I said, these layouts were, it sounds like the lower layout isn't sort of sounding any alarms. And so that's, you know, good feedback as well. And I think, you know, these are schematic, and we can look at them and talk to staff about it further. See if there's, you know, a way to sort of.
Andrew, this is Marla. I don't know that I would agree that the lower one isn't sounding any alarms. That one, the lower sort of L-shaped building definitely has parking to the front, so that wouldn't be allowed. But if you just kind of took that and did a mirror image of it so the parking was to the back, that would be allowed. So understanding this is exceptional. We don't need to nitpick it to death.
Is it okay if I
And that
write
would be,
scribbles?
this would be, so in this instance, we would be saying that this road was the primary. Is that?
Let me look at the lot plan for that. So I'm going to do what I did before, and let me switch back to orange because that works pretty well. So the lot lines there are here-ish. Oh, I missed, but it's close to that. And there-ish. So this lower lot with the L-shaped building on it only has one front in the way you've laid it out. Oh, I missed one. There's another one like here in your subdivision plan.
So I'm sorry, Mark. I'm just trying to understand. So explain what the issue here is, because we are shielding
to the front of a building.
So you're suggesting the cul-de-sac road there would be the road that is being suggested as the front as opposed to Kimball?
Well, I think that this lot doesn't front on Kimball, correct? Or have I have I drawn my orange lines wrong? I'm kind of flipping between two screens here. Oh, I may have drawn my orange. Delilah, you want to erase those drawings and I'll try again?
I can pull it up here.
So it looks like maybe this lot, okay, so I may have misunderstood. I think this is the lot line here, and this is the other lot line. And then is this a lot line as well here?
Andrew, do you have that sheet in front of you?
The lot for that building as currently drawn fronts on Kimball and on the cul-de-sac. The lot goes all the way through.
Okay.
There's three lots. And that blue line.
Okay, so just the orange.
Yeah, just the orange are the lot lines.
Okay, so I guess I would ask the board, you know, what is the front of the bottom lot there? Because the top two have two fronts, and that's fine. You know, parking has to be side and rear. It looks like you are mostly compliant with that. The bottom one is a through lot, so parking has to be to the side or rear relative to the principal street.
Are you talking about lot 8? C1, you are lot 8 right there?
Yeah.
You say the bottom lot? Okay, so I make sure I'm looking at the right thing. Ooh.
I don't
yeah,
know. I mean, the topography really is pretty steep there. It looks like there's a big grade drop. I'm just looking at the other sheet on my own screen right now. It looks like there's maybe 30 feet of grade between Kimball Avenue and that cul-de-sac street.
Yeah, I was gonna say, guys, I honestly, like, you know, I assume at the preliminary plat level that we could still talk through this and make changes to lots, you know, within that hearing process. And, you know, I can tell you with this particular lot, that boomerang shaped building has already raised a bunch of red flags trying to get the plans to preliminary plat level. The grading doesn't work, and the lot is going to have to get redesigned anyway. And so I would say, you know, rather than sort of running through this scenario too much, that it would make sense to sort of, we get the feedback, and I think we can address some of the concerns, and we're going to have to, just from, you know, grading and site design criteria at any rate. And so, you know, if you guys feel like, you know, that this can be a topic for the next meeting, you know, once we let us sort of work it a little bit more and you know, bring that to you.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I think, Marla, I think we're all just putting out notice saying, you know, you've got to address this issue, or you know, or we're going to have to address
absolutely.
it. So if that's not where the bill go, then I guess we don't have to needle to death, but we do have to make sure that there's no parking in the front.
So this is Marla. At the previous hearing the previous meeting on April 4th, you guys had said that your intent was to not design these lots as part of this first phase, right? You were gonna apply for preliminary plat approval for the residential portion and sort of leave these as just lots. Is that still the case?
Yes.
Okay,
But you know, the lot, we do, you know, to your point and to what we're discussing here, you know, we don't want to draw lot lines that can't have compliant buildings eventually. So, you know, we will and can, you know, sort of produce some sort of high level drawings like this that can illustrate sort of what could be programmed to sort of give you guys some comfort in terms of that the lot layout makes sense and can be compliant, you know, in the future, if that makes sense. We're not going to be seeking the building approvals, but we can give you similar sketches to this to just sort of color in why the lots are drawn as they are and how we've adjusted them to account for this feedback.
That makes sense.
Okay. If the board has any other comments regarding commercial, we haven't touched on residential, or did we? I mean, are we covered, Marla, on residential blocks layouts as well? Or is there more questions that
I
need to
think
be
we're
answered?
okay on that one. Yeah. Probably move on to
Right.
dead end streets if the board doesn't have.
So let's talk about the dead end streets. Staff recommends the board discuss connectivity between the industrial commercial area to the east and the residential areas to the west. Because this project is all in one master plan, the applicant has referred to the commercial area as a neighborhood employment center. Staff considers the connectivity between the zones an important element. I skipped over. Staff recommends the board consider whether the dead end street between the residential section and the mixed commercial residential area east of Old Farm Road should connect to the eastern loop off of Old Farm Road. Let's start there. Can we, is that where the pointer is? Can we zoom in there? I can zoom in there, right? Yeah.
So this particular location where the red arrow is drawn on this plan, I think is what the comment was directed at. You know, previous iterations of the plan had a road running through there and sort of connecting across. It doesn't do a lot of good for the neighborhood development in that area. It sort of creates, you know, a bisecting road that doesn't lend very well to the R1 sort of character that we were looking for. There's a number of issues in that particular area. There's a wetland that's, you know, sort of to the right of that arrow if you're looking at your screen. There's a giant archaeological site that is sort of off the end of that cul-de-sac where we're not able to disturb any ground. And then there's sort of the theory behind that connection that I think, you know, we came around to the fact that we don't really want to be having people leaving those large commercial areas and cutting up onto the 20-foot wide street where we have, you know, the community pool and, you know, a very low density development pattern. I mean, I think that whole yellow area is 16 houses, I believe, 16 or 17 lots in total. And, you know, the coverage up there is 25% as a coverage limit. And that's for all impervious area on the R1 land that we have. And so that road would be using up a tremendous amount of coverage, taking away from coverage for amenities, for sidewalks, for, you know, homes to be built. It would also be, you know, sort of shedding water immediately adjacent to a wetland in sort of a steep area through an archaeological site that the state would, you know, require us to excavate, and which they would prefer for us to leave alone. So that was sort of the reasoning that it got taken out, and sort of why we sort of had cul-de-saced it. You know, and the last thing is that it really is a large, nice open space. And so it would sort of be a shame to put a road through the middle of it. You know, we are working on programming that currently, some really nice, you know, park area in there, thinking about a playground, some kind of community garden. So there's sort of a lot of stuff planned for in there. We'd hate to sort of split it apart with a road. So that was why.
Is that, are we looking at this arrow here? Is this, did you put this in, Marla, or is that?
No, I think that was
Part
in
of
the PowerPoint.
Okay.
I put it in just to sort of say, like, that was where I was thinking you were saying a road should connect.
So the question here was about sort of, whoops, where's my little annotation drawing guy? It's kind of about here. But I think that if we just kind of look at staff comment 17D as a whole, you know, I think that there, in general, we had some questions about whether the project has too many dead-end streets. And should there be more connectivity, either at this cul-de-sac or down here at the hammerhead? You know, should there be connectivity between these elbows, lost my pen again, these elbows here? You know, this other guy down at the bottom, should this connect over to here, or should it maybe connect down here? So, you know, maybe not all of these connections are necessary, but there was some questions about whether more connectivity, and probably not all of them, but is more connectivity warranted?
This is Evan again, and you know, one of the things, and listen, we're not pushing back on the idea of connectivity. You know, part of the allure of this neighborhood, and I think what makes it work well, is that there is a lot of pedestrian connectivity, bicycle connectivity, and then there's, I think, appropriate vehicle connectivity. But I think we also need to realize that we are on a hillside, and so there are certain areas that don't lend well to actual road connectivity. And even some of the areas, the pedestrian connectivity might not be appropriate just because of that grade change or because of retaining walls that have to be built. And so what we're trying
Where are
to
those
do,
areas, Evan? Specifically?
so if you look at, let's see, so on the left side of, yeah, right there, right where you're circling, there's a pretty significant grade change there. And there's a potential that there's going to have to be a retaining wall above that road as it jogs to the south. And so, you know, trying to make a connection there, one, as Andrew pointed out, kind of bifurcates what would be a green space. And while it's probably not going to be a big flat graded area, you know, it would be a landscaped area. And we're not really sure what purpose it you know, furthers to have that vehicle connectivity or even a pedestrian connectivity other than someone walking across that lawn area. And similarly on the so the north side of that arrow, so kind of the back side of the red arrow, you have a similar issue there where you have a grade change, but you also have an archaeological issue there, where the state's preference is to leave that as it is and to not mess with it. So that's why we didn't make that connection either. And again, it lends well to creating a larger open green space. It creates buffers in between residences and it creates buffers in between uses. So, you know, I think where we're coming at it is we think there should be a balance. We think there's an appropriate balance here of connectivity. And we think there's appropriate balance of livability and, you know, kind of accessibility for folks.
Matt, can I offer a comment?
You know, I would add.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Mark.
Yeah, I agree with Marla wholeheartedly. To me, it doesn't feel like this is an interconnected neighborhood. It feels like it's two separate neighborhoods that are adjacent to each other. If I'm reading this right, the only vehicle connection between phase 1 and phase 2 is up by Kimball. The old Farm Road extension, I think on the original map we were looking at was in orange. And other than that, they're completely separated. And there is no interconnectivity. And I agree, I get that there's some grade changes and steep slope issues to contend with, but when you're doing this big of a development, you have some control and you have some ability to work around some of that. And like right now, like the phase 1 townhouses, those long stretches, it just feels like it's long stretches of road with houses on either side and nothing connecting the two, or 3 or 4 strips of houses. So that's my comment.
I was going to say, what the vehicle connectivity is shown here, there's a whole map that shows pedestrian connectivity and path network connectivity. I think there's quite a bit of that. I think that we would look to enhance that over vehicle connectivity, just, in keeping with the character of this area and the sort of, design of the neighborhood. I think if you ask yourself why a vehicle would want to get from the end of that cul-de-sac up into, a street that has 30 residential homes on it, I don't know that there's a really good answer to that. And so, but if you ask yourself, would a resident want to walk up through there? I think that they would. And so, that's why we've sort of erred on the side of connecting the community in that way. And to Evan's point, the grade challenges are significant. And, that in particular, the one intersection that was circled, we've been told there's just not a way to connect it if we wanted to. The other thing I wanted to point out is that the small hammerhead road at the bottom of the page is only meant to be a driveway. So that's programmed as a private driveway that serves 5 footprint lots, which is why it doesn't connect anywhere.
And then the hammerhead in the mixed IC that comes off of that through road from Kimball down to Tilley Drive, so it juts out to the west. Yeah, right there. Again, I mean, we made kind of a subjective decision that made some sense if you're going to have commercial development down there that have pedestrian connectivity so people could walk to work, but creating kind of a through road for people to cut through a residential neighborhood didn't make a lot of sense there, particularly since you've got access off Kimball, you've got access off Tilley. It seemed like we were creating more problems than solving.
You have a nature trail on lot 2, proposed neighborhood path on lot 5 and lot 6. That's just a straight line right now, but what's the idea there? It's so everyone that's in those neighborhoods, those lots, can access the park, right? But that's right through a one of the lots, the nature trail.
Off of the hammerhead there?
Yeah, right here. And then there's a nature trail.
That's
nature
not.
trail here
That's
too.
that's just a label. That's not. I don't think
The
that's
label pointing to the yellow line.
Oh, got it.
Yeah, that's.
So what's the
poorly labeled.
connectivity to all these lots to the park? Through here?
Poorly pointed.
The lower park, like at the far right, the open space down by the edge of the property.
Yeah, if what connects this development, the lots 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 down here in the lower right hand side to the park and to the village green. If as you say, there's no plan to connect the cars there. What's how do you connect
that blue line? The blue line is a path up. We could certainly look at adding another blue path through where it says proposed nature trail. something in there, you know, if you wanted to have a middle connection. And then we had also talked with Marla at some point about adding, you know, a mid-block pedestrian connection in the longer, you know, yellow areas. I think that's a comment that's coming up. You know, it sort of in between those two blue lines, should there be a third blue line? I think that, you know, those sorts of things, like, you know, we're going to be talking to the path committee and the rec committee, and I think that those things can get flushed out. Certainly adding pedestrian paths and interconnectivity is a lot more straightforward than changing the road network. And we're definitely, you know, open to that. We hear the message, so.
And this right here, that's the farm, right? The white space?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we might have lost Evan. That white lot is a building that we don't own. So it's a farmhouse. The actual barn itself is on the green lot where it says Village Green.
Okay.
The white lot is one that we don't.
You were saying that this industrial commercial road on the right-hand side of the page right now is connected to Tilly. I mean, is that a connection that'll be active when you build it, or is that a connection that's sort of a future planned connection?
Yeah, so I think what Evan meant was that the road, you know, goes to our property line so that, you know, eventually it can connect with the Tilly Drive project and out over to Heinsberg Road. We're not proposing to construct that across the Pizzigalli property, but we are extending it so that it can eventually, you know, carry out. There's a map, city, on the city's official map, there's an easement or a road connection through there. So it's been part of the city's long-term plan. And so that was our way of making sure that that connection was part of our project. So we've laid that road out to connect through to Tilly and eventually to Heinsberg Road. And we did not connect the industrial commercial lots with the residential neighborhood. There is an easement off of, you know, there's a pedestrian easement off of the corner. There's space there so that, you know, if it ever became desirable to make that connection, that in the future it could get looked at. But it's not there primarily because of the volume of traffic that the IC uses will generate. I mean, you're talking about medical office, you're talking about manufacturing uses, potential, you know, really high traffic uses. And so to sort of create that connection, we haven't talked a whole lot about the R1 land in this project, but the residential housing that we're proposing is in the R1 district, and the coverage ratio is 25%. So 75% of the land involved in this project is green, untouched open land. The character of the neighborhood is substantially more open than the Hillside neighborhood currently is, which is at about a 40% coverage. And so I think, you know, if you sort of view it in that more open and sort of rural character, that's why we didn't feel like a lot of these sort of more block style roadways were needed. I mean, you know, you're looking at in total, you know, around 120 homes in that area, serviced by 3,000 or 4,000 feet of new road as is. And so in trying to keep that coverage down and sort of limit the impervious surface, that's sort of where we landed.
Matt, can I make a comment?
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm getting a little uncomfortable with some of the way we're describing these two different neighborhoods with the 25% coverage and the 40% coverage, and trying to avoid the through roads and the interconnectivity, because it kind of goes, in my opinion, completely counterintuitive to what we look at when we look at developing new neighborhoods with interconnectivity. It's really creating an isolated, separated, it feels like an exclusive neighborhood without having, you know, these multiple vehicular connections. You know, if you, let's just say you lived in the hillside area, but you worked in the industrial commercial side area, you got to drive down to Kimball, go all the way up to Kennedy or Kimball, and then back into the neighborhood. It just feels exclusive to me, and I'm not having a great feeling about it. Also, I have a question for Marla when it goes to block length. Is that something that applies to this district, or is that only in the southeast quadrant? Because it looks like we have some excessively long blocks of houses without the broken part. And I know we were talking about pedestrian connections, but I don't recall previously we would allow pedestrian connection to be part of a block length breakup.
Block lengths are limited outside of the SEQ, but it's a little bit longer. I think it is 600 feet. I'll double check that though.
Okay, thank you.
It's 600 feet. It's a comment in the staff comments as well.
Right. In
Slide
the
22.
SEQ, there's a specific provision to allow a pedestrian connection to substitute for a roadway connection. So that's the part that I'm not off the top of my head about. Connections to adjacent parcels.
That is in ours as well. Pedestrian connection may be used as mid-block connection.
Okay. Well, if you're sure, I won't look it up then.
Yeah, no, it was your
Okay.
comment, V. I don't know exactly where, but that was the text.
Block
of it.
length should be no greater than 600 feet. Pedestrian connections may be used as mid-block connections. Staff recommends the board discuss whether the applicant should include a vehicular or pedestrian mid-block connection on each of the loop roads off of Old Farm Road.
Right, and I think that's what maybe Evan or Andrew was talking about and Mark was alluding to earlier, is that this section through here may want to be sort of a mid-block connection, but I take Mark's point that it's really odd patchwork zoning through here. This central area that's sort of in the yellow tones on the page right now is R1, is that right, Andrew?
Yeah, it's the
Yeah.
R1 PRD.
And then the existing master plan area off to the left of the page is R4?
12.
Or 12.
R12. And then the gray area to the right of the page is industrial commercial. So it is sort of this different maximum density, maximum lot coverage as you move across the page by zoning.
Yeah.
And the board can't waive the maximum lot coverage in a district. They can aggregate lot coverage across a PUD as long as it's within the same zoning district. But as soon as you switch zoning districts, you have to comply with the lot coverage within that zoning district.
Right.
It's just sort of a weird.
I think, I mean,
thing.
to Mark's point, I mean, fundamentally, that's a challenge here, you know, and the regulations don't allow you to mix the uses. They don't allow you to mix the coverage. And so, you know, if it feels like sort of distinct areas, you know, it's because the uses and coverages are fixed.
I get that point, but you know, it's the interconnectivity that I have an issue with, and or the lack thereof. You know, if I'm looking at the scale of the plans correctly, that one loop road, you know, with the two lots that are sort of created by it on either side where the original farm is and the property you don't control, that's got to be pushing a quarter of a mile long, you know, 1,200 feet without interruption of a block. And it just feels out of scale and not like a neighborhood, which clearly this project is scaled and sized to be creating. So and again, I'm just one of the board members, but I do feel I have an issue with the lack of vehicular connection amongst these things. It's creating these isolated pockets, which yes, they are three separate distinct zoning areas, but they're all being developed into as part of one neighborhood, one development. And that I just feel they should be connected more.
Okay, any other comments? I want to make sure we address all the dead end street comments that staff put on. So forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but there are two roadways with a 90-degree bends in proximity to one another at the northern end of the western loop of Old Farm Road. Staff considers connectivity to be important here. What, oops, we changed the map.
Yeah, if you go, I think the next slide will show it. We had touched on that a bit already. Boy, it looks like we're on. This was the private. I don't know where you're going here.
90-degree bends in proximity to one another at the northern end of the western loop. Where is that specifically?
So go down one more slide, Marla. There. So this is a shot circled in the red circle, and then there's a zoomed in shot of that. We tried to connect that road. The land planner connected the road. The engineer took it out. I've been told emphatically that there is not a way to connect those two roads by the engineer. That it would be like a 15% slope to meet the existing Old Farm Road. And it is just not viable.
Is that what you meant by comment 3? Or is that what was intended by that?
Yeah, that's the location.
D3. Okay. We can't get up that hill with that connection, is what you're saying, Andrew.
Yeah, and I'm not we could have Scott, available at the next meeting to talk about it further. I'm not an engineer, but I believe that because Old Farm Road has its own, you have to connect to the existing Old Farm Road grade, and you're you sort of have to get from one height to another, and your two ends are fixed, and the slope in between is too steep to meet, any sort of responsible standard. But
weird.
we can absolutely look at bolstering the pedestrian connection in there, and sort of incorporating it in the programming for the park, and sort of making that a really nice.
May I
way
propose
through
an
the boat.
alternative way of thinking about it? What if those two 90-degree bends weren't so close to each other, so it didn't feel like they wanted to be connected? Maybe obviously the one on the left exists today, but maybe this one comes down to here or something, which kind of opens up that green space to be a little bit wider as well.
Marla, what are you saying to narrow up the north end of the meadow area there?
So I've got my
Where it says
screen.
Village Green.
Do you see where I drew an orange line kind of here-ish?
Yep.
Let me make it bigger, Marla. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
So what if you were to move that road so those 90-degree bends weren't actually touching or nearly touching each other? And that would allow the open space to be a little bit more meaningful through there. I mean, it's just an alternative approach, and obviously this is all supposed to be board feedback, not staff feedback. So I'd be interested to hear if members of the board feel like this is kind of an awkward 90-degree bends, or if they understand the topography and can visualize how this wouldn't be awkward.
Just to weigh in here really quickly. So one of the reasons why we did what we did there was to create that 4-way intersection there. If we didn't have that narrow bend, then you end up with a curb cut on the west side of the road that doesn't align with the curb cut on the east side of the road. And, for what it's worth, I mean, I get that park, it looks awkward on paper, but there really is a pretty significant grade change there. So it's not like you have a curb that's, 15 feet apart from another curb. There's a hillside there.
So how tall of a retaining wall are you talking about in, let me see if I can get this area right here. Where that second, those two bends are in close proximity to each other.
I think there's probably a retaining wall on the lower road would probably be what we would do. Along the top of the lower road, so that it would be no retaining wall off of the upper area. So that it would kind of drop down. You'd have like a staircase down to the road, the lower road.
Okay.
That makes any sense?
Yeah.
But I'd have to look into that. I don't want to pretend to know the answer to that.
Yeah. I think to Marlo's point, I agree with her, and I think that if we were to, I'm going to try to draw it in here. One thought, and again, we're not supposed to be designing this, but if you were to pull it almost down to here and make this park in here that much bigger, then you'd be fronting on Village Green. These curb cuts here wouldn't be so far apart, or they would be far enough apart that it would be, not like they're just slightly ajar. The park would become bigger, and you wouldn't be so tight on these two 90-degree elbows that it feels like a mistake.
We can definitely look at that. I don't think, we're open to suggestions on that. We've looked at that corner a lot. Like Andrew said, we tried to make that connection. So, I think we're open to solutions there.
Okay, good. There's a spur of the road at the south end of the development. Staff recommends the board ask the applicant to describe the concept for this roadway. Roadways are required to extend to adjacent property lines. The applicant does not wish the roadway to extend to the property line to the south. It should connect it to the neighborhood employment center to the east. We touched on this briefly, but I just want to make sure we cover all our bases here.
Yeah, so I just included here sort of a screenshot of where that future roadway connection would go. I think it's a pretty safe bet that the folks who own the pool would be on this call if we were proposing a through street in that location. But the road there is intended to be a private driveway, so there wouldn't be a requirement to extend it. It's serving 5 footprint lots, which I think is the allowed limit for a private driveway. We recognize that the homes will likely have to be sprinklered to meet with the fire department's requirements for private driveways. But that is sort of a really, just intended to be a driveway to serve those 5 units.
Okay. And then the last one on the dead end streets, 5, is about block lengths no greater than 600 feet. Pedestrian connections may be used as block connections. We discussed that prior. Any other comments?
I just want
regarding the dead end streets? Go ahead.
I just want to mention that, we had a road in one iteration that went along the north side of the white plot. And when we had met with Justin 6 or 8 months ago, probably with Public Works, he had asked us to take it out because it was steep and it was, a safety concern. So we have looked at some of these things. They've been kind of vetted, but we will look at that again, to the recommendations here. And we can, I don't want to, that was a different plan at that point in time. And so, I don't want to say that that's definitively the case currently, but we'll look into it and get, again, and sort of have more information the next time we talk.
Okay.
We can absolutely look at adding a pedestrian connection through the middle. I mean, that's something that.
Before we move on to staff or the board, have any more comments regarding connectivity? If not, let's talk natural resource protection. Page 6, 18, it appears the open space are located in the proximity of the wetland buffers. Staff recommends the board ask the applicant to show wetlands and wetland buffers on their plan so impacts to the wetland buffers can be evaluated. Wetland and wetland buffer impacts should be limited, as always. Staff also recommends the board ask the applicant to show river corridors and stream setbacks on plans in order to determine compliance with standards for each. That's not something you have now, is it, Evan or Andrew?
No, but we're okay with those recommendations, and we'll show it on the plans for preliminary.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
this is
those are all, go ahead, Don.
no, go ahead, Andrew.
I was just gonna say, we do have all of that. It might be in what we filed on one of the many plans, but we'll certainly provide a sort of section dedicated to that and call it out at the next application, make sure everybody's clear. But there will be no impacts to wetlands or wetland buffers in the project.
So
Okay,
this
go
is
ahead, Don.
I'm thinking about some of the public comments earlier related to deforestation and all the trees that came down. Will this plan involve removal of, I mean, I'm having a hard time envisioning how many trees are out there. How much more, I'm not sure that's grammatically correct. How much more deforestation will there need to be?
Well, there will undoubtedly be some trees, and it's a big site work project, but there's not a lot of dense forest on the locations where we're proposing for development. And again, there is a buffer down by Potash Brook anyway that we'll be staying away from. So, I mean, it's a little bit subjective as to someone making the argument that there was widespread deforestation, and then someone else saying that trees need to be removed to build homes. So it's
Right.
I don't know how to accurately say other than there will be some trees removed, but if you walked out on Old Farm Road right now and looked to the east, there isn't an untouched native forest there.
Right. Okay.
Largely pasture land that has some trees located, and we are saving some of the trees on Old Farm Road, and we'll do our best to save any significant tree that works within the plan.
But
again, we're not, go ahead.
it sounds like most of the deforestation that people keep referring to has already happened
Yeah, I would say that would be
in phase one.
an accurate statement.
Okay. And
Yeah,
some of that
we
was
can,
evaporated by a storm, wasn't it?
Yeah, a lot of those trees had come down, but they're white pines, so the trees that were on the west side of the road were white pines, which are historically unstable trees, so they were coming down on themselves anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not saying we didn't have to remove a lot of trees to build Hillside. I mean,
Right.
we were upfront and clear about that to begin with.
Yeah. Thank you.
well, we can include, we will include sort of a aerial, satellite image of the development in the next project. I think in the next round of submissions, I think it would be useful to have an overlay on a Google satellite image for a lot of reasons. So, that should help answer your question too.
And can you provide one, Andrew, before any of this was done? Do you have one?
Including the previous master plan or the previous phase, the Hillside phase?
Yes.
We might have an old satellite image. I can ask.
Okay, thanks.
The current Google Earth 3D current Google Earth of that area is pre-Hillside development, so it shows all of the forestation.
Yeah, hold on a moment.
Okay.
I'm looking at it right now. So.
Thanks, Mark.
There you go.
Nope.
Not that one?
Nope.
It's Google Maps. Google Earth is a different
Yeah,
data,
Google
right?
Earth also tells you sort of grade change from one area to the other with topography.
I mean, it's helpful to see that as well.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, because that shows the existing forest on the east side, or the existing foliage. For what it's largely worth, just to be historically accurate, we also have satellite images or aerial photography, going back to the time that predated Kennedy and Kimball, which shows that this is by and large deforested pasture land. So, while the west side of Old Farm Road did have trees on it, those weren't native forests. It was white pine that grew up over time.
So this is
Oh,
Old
in
Farm
answer.
Road, and most of this development is proposed to occur on the right-hand side of Old Farm Road. So the Potash Brook is down in this vicinity. Is that right?
No, a
no.
little bit further to the east. So
This
it's
one.
actually just to the right. Yeah, just to the left of Community Drive. Yep.
Okay. So this
And I would
development
say-
would impact the first place I circled and this place I circled, and the rest of it is generally not wooded.
I would say too, Marla, that I'm drawing a line here. This is like almost, something like that is wetland and wetland buffer.
Okay.
So a lot of that is going to remain. And similarly down here, our property line is like somewhere in this area. And so we don't actually own a lot of the trees on the, but I'll get you the overlay of the lot lines on the image in the next round.
Yeah, and Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, but where you drew that blue line is also where that cul-de-sac road runs and where that archaeological area is, correct?
Yeah, the archaeological area is somewhere in here. Right. That didn't work. Somewhere in, no, it's not working now. Somewhere in there. And the cul-de-sac road is like somewhere right in here.
Okay.
That's a really good question and a good point. We should have an overlay on the satellite image, so we'll do that going forward.
Great, thank you. Compatibility with planned development patterns, staff recommends. Board asks the applicant to present how the project will relate to the adjacent areas with consideration for the following context. Connectivity scale, community connection between MP1 and the current master plan, including the parks, Kimball Avenue development areas, residential neighborhoods at the south end of Old Farm Road, the out parcel that is embedded within the master plan area, Tilly Drive development, possible exit 12B in Potash Brook as a natural resource. So that's a lot there. But we want to know how this project's going to fit into everything around it. That's currently there or could be there. Evan?
Yeah, no, sure. We will, we can go and, do you want us to discuss that at length tonight, or do you want to have that fleshed out in the preliminary plat? Because that's also a requirement of our Act 250 submission as well.
Yeah, certainly. If you could summarize it now, if you want to, but we're definitely going to need it at the next stage of review.
Yeah. So what we've tried to do here again is have the existing hillside residential neighborhood segue nicely into this residential neighborhood on the crest of the hill, and then down the east side of Old Farm Road, and then getting into more dense development as you get up to Kimball Ave, which segues nicely into the existing commercial development along Kimball Ave, which is a more heavily developed area with larger commercial buildings. And as you run down Kimball to Community Drive, and then as you get into the mixed IC district, again, that's consistent with the style of development you'll see at both at Technology Park along Community Drive, as well as Mountain View Park along Tilly Drive. So we think that it segues very nicely. And then we also have provided all these pedestrian and recreation paths, which both add to and complete existing recreation and pedestrian paths. So again, to the point that Mark had brought up earlier, I mean, we think that there's actually pretty good connectivity. We understand the critique on the vehicular connectivity, which we'll continue to look to refine. Although I think we do have some boundaries that we have to respect there in terms of the topography. But in terms of the style of the development and how it coincides with what's around it, I think it's very consistent, and it provides nice segues from more kind of suburban style or rural style to increase in density as we get up to the larger and more heavily trafficked commercial areas.
Any comments from the board regarding that staff comment? Any comments from staff regarding number 24?
24?
Excuse me, not 24, 20, number 20. Ooh. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot in there, but we'll use this in our next submission. We can touch on each of these in detail, each of these questions.
Okay. Number 21, open space design. This criterion pertains to the continuity of the open spaces between parcels and between stream buffers. Related to block length, staff recommends the board review the design northern end of the Western Loop Road. Discuss whether shifting the bend to the south would improve open space connectivity and roadway design. Can we go back to that?
So that's kind of what we already talked about.
Yeah.
That was bringing that elbow down. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I mean, we're open to looking at that again.
Okay, good. Fire department review. The applicant is proposing 20-foot wide roadways with sidewalk on one side. There cannot be a curb. Understood. If the commercial buildings are sprinkled, there must be a hydrant within 100 feet of the fire department connection. The applicant is encouraged to think about this spacing and how it relates to the adjacent residential layout, which I'm sure you are. Compatibility with infrastructure, item number 22. Staff recommends the board discuss with the applicant what elements of the project they intend to turn over to the city and what they intend to remain private. Okay, let's look at the map with the parks and the roads. So Evan, Andrew, what is what's
Does that
going to be a
work? Do you
public
want a
road?
different page, Andrew?
I think this is a good one. I think largely the response to this question was that, we haven't really programmed the open spaces yet. And so I think that there's a little bit of, what do they end up with on them? And then in that discussion as to whether, it wants to be a city park or just a private, homeowner association controlled park. Currently there's one city park in Hillside, this one here. And that has a playground and sort of a large open space in it. Currently the barn building and pool and things associated with it is, considered to be for the owners of the project. Other than that one space, I think the other areas are yet to be programmed and sort of yet to be conceived. So I don't think we have. I don't think we have an answer to that necessarily today, but I think we'd be happy to propose, a framework for what, in consultation with the rec committee that we're going to be meeting with in a few weeks, with staff and, with your feedback tonight as to, what you guys think would make sense.
Yeah, my assumption is that DPW would probably want to weigh in on that. But like Andrew said, we're open to that discussion about those generalized green spaces.
Well, certainly when it comes to the
Oh,
recreation trails and paths, as someone who walks quite a bit, certainly want those part of the public, something that the public can access.
Oh yeah, and that's certainly in the intent. I mean, as I think most people can attest, the O'Brien family has been very generous with allowing people to use this property for years, and that would be the intent going forward, with the one exception potentially being that barn property, because there is going to be a significant investment that goes into it, and so it would likely be somewhat subsidized by homeowners association dues for the operating costs. But the park spaces, the rec pass, bike pass, etc., that's intended to be public.
Right. Marla?
Yeah, there's sort of, I think there's a difference between being open to the public and being owned by the public, right? So, like the paths along the front of Cider Mill, for instance, are open to the public, but not owned by the public. But I think that there's pluses and minuses to city ownership of some of these open spaces. The pluses are that they can be modified as things change, demands change. The minuses being that obviously it's more maintenance requirements on our Department of Public Works and our Recreation Department. And as the applicant said, we'd want to get DPW feedback on that. But I think some of the comments that were discussed on April 7th pertain to the type of open space and, taking into consideration that this could be up to 800 homes between Master Plan 1 that's already been approved and what's being approved now. So we want to make sure that the programming of those open spaces is appropriate for that number of families living there.
So as
That makes
Andrew
sense.
mentioned, we have reached out to Bike and Ped and also Rec and Park. So we'll be meeting with them as soon as they can get us in.
I heard back from the Bike and Ped Committee today. They're working out what they want to do in terms of who's going to be the right people, because they're not meeting right now. But I just want to let you know that they're working on it, and they'll be back in touch really soon.
Great.
Item number 23, staff notes the CCTA stations that the applicant has shown on the plan are not anticipated to remain and should not be included in future submissions. Where are these CCTA stations?
There are none.
So I think
All in
they're,
Kennedy, I believe.
yeah, I think they're shown on the master plan cover sheet. Potentially, there's one shown there.
Oh, I see.
Go up a couple of
Over here.
other up a couple more slot pages. There's, I think, two. There's another one. Oh, it's grayed out. It's actually shown there. It's a little grayed out. Yeah. We had
They're
thought
going
that
away?
there was a
Is that
bus
right?
line.
I wouldn't count on them staying.
There's one here, one there, one here.
Marla, what is the rationale for that?
Well, Tom Chittenden is our representative to CCTA, but what I understand is their program is contracting, not expanding, and applicants often, not only you guys, but we get it from a lot of other applicants as well. People love the idea of having a bus stop in their neighborhood, and it's not really realistic to expect new bus stops to occur. And in fact, some of those existing bus stops may be going away.
I'm having a hard time hearing you. I'm sorry. People don't like the idea of a bus stop in their neighborhood?
No, people love the idea of a bus stop in their neighborhood. Unfortunately, the CCTA budget is contracting, and
I see.
bus stops are being taken away.
I see. Thank you.
We wouldn't want it on plan because we don't want people to assume that there's a bus stop when there's not one. If there's
We
not one.
shouldn't count on them, yeah. And guys, if you wanted to talk to Tom Chittenden about any of that, he kind of has his finger on the pulse of what CCTA may or may not be able to do.
Okay. Yeah, we'll definitely address that with him. I mean, it is a little bit of a catch-22 because if you don't have scale on the routes, you're not going to have a bus station, or a bus stop. Ideally, if we have the type of scale we're talking about here, it might be more attractive, and they might be able to gain funding based on that. But yeah, we can't guarantee.
Right. Okay. Item number 24. Request waivers and consideration. Review the master plans. The DRB must specify the level of review and process required for subsequent applications pursuant to the master plan. For example, the DRB may specify the final site plan only shall be required for specified portions of a project, or that certain elements of the PUD may be amended by final plat application only. The applicant has noted that they anticipate requesting setback waivers and height waivers, though specific waiver requests have not been enumerated at this time. Staff recommends the board require the applicant to specifically enumerate the requested waivers and demonstrate the resulting impacts prior to granting approval. This may mean that the waivers are more appropriately granted as part of a PUD approval for each phase rather than on an overall master plan basis. Is that consistent with what we did with the first iteration of this property, Marla?
I'm just reading it again. Staff recommends the board require.
We handled the waivers in the master plan, or did we handle them? Boy, it's been a while.
Yeah, so there were a lot of waivers in the master plan 1 that we're kind of calling it for the purposes of this application. And some of them were a little bit awkward because they were site plan specific. Waivers that are maybe appropriate for PUD are waivers that would apply to the whole project rather than to individual sites. So we just wanted to sort of call that to everyone's attention and see how, because I wasn't part of this team when you guys did the first approval. But could that process go a little bit differently? And does the board want to see, more overall waivers, or were they comfortable with the sort of very specific waivers that were approved as part of the previous master plan.
And then you list them there. Setback
Well,
waivers,
blue
I do
was
remember
the blue
those.
was the applicant,
Height waivers, road standard waivers, permit duration waivers.
Yeah, I think
What was the,
so.
go ahead.
So the items listed there in the blue, I think, are sort of our feedback. You know, I think the perspective that we would have on it is, you know, we think that the initial master plan that we had filed for Hillside Phase 1, you know, it seems to have worked fairly well in terms of the waivers that were in it. It was a little bit clunky. It certainly didn't get sort of where we're hoping to get to in this one. I think, you know, site-specific information, I think is, to Marlo's point, you know, it's pretty hard to give a waiver for at master plan. I think what we're sort of hoping to solidify are these 4 big picture items that sort of really go to the heart of being able to complete the project. You know, if there are not, you know, if there has to be a 50-foot setback for, you know, some of those new buildings along the Old Farm Road where we reoriented it, you know, where we had that whole conversation about how buildings should be set back, you know, or where the front yard is. You know, I think along some of those roads, Kimball Avenue and Kennedy Drive, I mean, the setbacks are like 100 feet from the right of way. I mean, some of them are collector streets, or I forget what they call them, but there's some really big setbacks and things through there that sort of, you know, we would seek to get those reduced to something that sort of is in line with the visuals that we're showing you. Just because otherwise there's no certainty, you know, if somebody decided in the future that that waiver shouldn't be granted, you know, we would have a road and a lot layout built that didn't work. And so I think that that's really our focus is solidifying waivers that go to the core of the ability to develop the project in line with the vision that we're presenting. And we can enumerate those specifically, but it basically, I think it falls into these 4 categories. And,
Yeah,
you know,
so
with,
at
you
the
know,
next- at the next stage of review, you would have those specific asks and the reasoning why in your master plan preliminary plot. Is that correct?
yeah, we would do that. But they're going to fall
Okay.
into essentially, I think, these buckets with the addition, which Marla mentioned, which I think is a good one, is process waivers. I think we would add a 5th category for process waivers. You know, just for instance, like that, we had a hearing the other day where we were amending something, and we were with you guys like a month ago, and we only needed to have 1 hearing for it. And I think that that's because we had a waiver, you know, built into the master plan that these sorts of little things could just get handled with one meeting. You know, there's some stuff like that that makes sense, right? If we're just doing a minor amendment to something within the master plan, that we can skip a sketch plan hearing or something like that.
Is that your interpretation, Marla, Delilah?
Yeah,
That's
those are
the
all
advantage
reasonable
of
things to ask
doing
for.
this? Okay. Okay. Any other comments? And we'll move on to 25, which is phasing. The applicant has provided a loose discussion of phasing in their application cover letter. Staff recommends the board request the applicant to show on their plans the limits of each described phase in order to allow the board to evaluate the phasing plan as it pertains to access, circulation, and open space.
Yeah, we tried to get a phasing plan ready and to you guys in time for the conversation tonight. It didn't materialize. You know, there's sort of a lot of different considerations that go into how to put that together. We're absolutely going to have a phasing plan for you. There's probably going to be a number of phases within the project. It needs to have a lot of phases in order to sort of progress in a logical way that makes sense. And so, you know, we're fully on board with that. We're going to seek, you know, phasing for the project, and we will have a detailed phasing plan to present to you guys.
And
you know,
I don't know if
conceptually,
it's required. I don't know if it's required because it's two different projects, but where this phasing of this project would align with the phasing of the existing approved project. Because there's more to go there too, but maybe it falls right in order. I don't know.
I think conceptually, sort of what we're envisioning for the phasing is that they'll be, they won't necessarily be sequential, but they'll be, you know, independent, right? So like, they'll have to work as they're permitted, if that makes any sense, you know, and they'll also be, you know, there'll be there would be a phase for Kimball Avenue traffic improvements. And so that phase would have a trigger, which is when you reached a certain number of trips or how the traffic impact study sort of said when that was merited. And then, you know, that phase would get turned on as it was required. You know, there would be another phase potentially for the, you know, one of the loop roads, maybe, you know, the Meadow Loop Road on the left side. There would be a phase for each park and each green space. And then we would sort of set up a framework, you know, once so many homes are built in phase 2, you know, phase 4, the park is required to be built for those homes. Once so much of this is done, the traffic light will be required. And so we're going to put together something like that will essentially give you all the pieces. And then it'll sort of talk about, you know, when you hit this milestone, this phase has to go. When you reach this milestone, this phase has to go, you know, or to create those, to sort of make sure the amenities and the roads and the infrastructure all progress simultaneously so that folks aren't living in, you know, without a green space for the first 6 years of the project.
Right. Great. Yes. 26, also on phasing, staff considers the phasing plan should take into consideration communal elements of the project, such as parks and paths, which is what you just mentioned, Andrew. So each phase is accompanied by a proportional amount of infrastructure and recommends the board request the applicant assign the communal elements to phases. I would agree with that statement, and you just mentioned that you were going to do that, so we can move on if there's no more discussion on that.
Absolutely.
F, affordable housing. This is the last comment, number 27. City Council has warned draft amendments to the LDRs, which include minimum requirements for affordable housing. 10% of ownership and 15% of rental units will need to be affordable as defined in exchange. There's an offset for more market rate units. Key elements of the standard include must be physically integrated into the overall layout, scale and massing of the development. Average number of bedrooms must equal those of the market rate. Size of the units have a minimum. Must be made available for occupancy concurrently with market rate units. And since this project will fall under the revised LDR, staff recommends the board ask the applicant to discuss their approach with respect to affordable housing. Just so I understand this, Marla, the draft amendments to the LDRs, it's your understanding that they'll be adopted before preliminary plat, so that's why why that comment is stated as such. Do I have that right?
Yes. This, if it's been warned, there's something.
We're also assuming they approve the draft LDRs.
If it goes back to, they approve it, it goes back to the date of warning, I believe.
Right.
In effect, to the date of when it was warned.
Right. So assuming that they do accept them and they vote affirmatively, this will be the LDRs that this project falls under, which will require you to build affordable housing. So I guess we would say that you'd have to discuss your approach at the next phase, unless you have something to tell us now.
No, for what it's worth, we have assumed both in this phase and in the multifamily component that both would include the inclusionary zoning requirements. We supported that process, and so on the for sale product, it's 10% of the homes, and then on the rental product, it's 15%. So we've already incorporated that into our planning.
Okay, good. Okay, are there any other comments from the board or staff regarding this sketch master plan before I open it up for public comments?
Yeah, Matt, I just wanted to make sure that in regards to the affordable housing, the plan, we get the plan, obviously well in advance, and that it meets the LDRs for, mix and spread. Don't want to beat a dead horse or talk about previous projects, but we don't want to end up in that same situation.
That's right. We do not want economic segregation. We want,
Correct.
we'd be able to spread it out evenly. And
our intent on the for sale product is that the affordable units would be located mixed within the market rate units on the where that red oval is outlined, so on the crest of Old Farm Road. And so it would be integrated into market rate units. And the intent right now is that the affordable units or the inclusionary units, we're designing 3-bedroom units, which is, according to the Affordable Housing Committee, is an underserved component within the community.
yes.
Yeah, so these would be the current plan is a 3-bedroom townhome, connected to market rate townhomes on the crest of Old Farm Road where that circle is. It also, this slide mentions that in terms of our phasing, that's intended to be the first phase of the project. And so the affordable housing would be being built, first.
Okay. Any other comments from the board before I open it up for public comment?
This is Alyssa. I just had one quick question.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, you've just referred to a significant archaeological site a number of times. I'm wondering what that is.
Well, I could share the report with you. There is, I think, I'm not an archaeological expert. I believe it's just sort of some what they find generally are not actually arrowheads, but shards that were the byproduct of making arrowheads. I think that's sort of, the primary piece of what that site is. And so, there's a couple.
It's a lithic site. They
there.
think that there was like stone tool making.
Yes, more than I think than I do based on that comment. But yes,
I've worked as an archaeologist. Yes.
That is the appropriate term, what you said. And I think that's what it is. And I'd be more than happy to share the report. It was the UVM Consulting Archaeology Program, and Scott Dillon have been out to the site numerous times. And we've reviewed the entire parcel. We had the whole thing plowed. They walked the entire thing looking for signs of archaeological significance. And then we found these few sites. I think there's one larger one, a couple small ones, but all of them, happy to share that report with you guys at some point if it's interesting.
Yeah, would love to see it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Alyssa. Thank you all. Is there any other comments on the board before I turn it over or the staff? Okay, so how this works with public comment is those that are on the call or using the GoToMeeting app, I'll ask you if you wish to make a public comment to state your name. After I think everyone who has had a chance to state their name, then I'll call on you individually to give you 3 minutes. And after 3 minutes, if you're still going on, there'll be a friendly buzzer reminding you it's time to wrap up. I'll also check the chat box if you prefer to write in your comments, and I will read them. Or if you prefer to send an email at that time, we will read them as we did during the public comment period. We'll make sure that they're part of the public record. Okay, so anyone that is on the phone or in the GoToMeeting, if you want to offer a public comment, please state your name now.
John Wilking.
Okay, John Wilking. Is there anyone else? I'm going to check the chat box right now. And I just have John. No one else has a public comment regarding this project? Okay then, John, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, hey Delilah, you're on the right page for me. Could you roll up just a touch so that you're at the top of the page? There you go. You can see if you follow Old Farm Road forward and across the street, the old Merchants Bank, current Community Bank, 20 Kimball and 30 Kimball and 40 Kimball, which is a dirt lot, all enter Kimball Avenue about 100 feet away from where they're tying their street in to Kimball Avenue. That's about 600 cars currently a day. It depends on the day, obviously, but there's about 600 parking spaces. And this is a site that was developed by O'Brien Brothers in about 1983, 4, 5, something like that. So the site that they're choosing to put their traffic light is not consistent with another site that they developed. Evan and I have had a discussion about this. We are doing some engineering work on 40 Kimball to see what happens to it. But this is an interconnected sort of back street that occurs back there. 40 Kimball has very limited flat area for development. And if we were forced to push the traffic to the traffic light, it would be its development use, its land value would disappear almost entirely, probably, but we're still working on that. My question really is, why not put it where it belongs? Right where all the traffic currently comes onto Kimball Avenue. I can tell you that today, well, not in the middle of the virus, but under normal circumstances, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you can't turn left out of our parking area as well. And that's because traffic is a constant flow from up the street, from the stop signs. It just ticks it off perfectly so you just can't turn left. It's a backup problem already. We know that there's a traffic issue on Kimball Avenue as a whole, and it may need to be enlarged at some point. My point is simply, this is the venue to talk about where that traffic ought to tie into Kimball Avenue, and I think there's a mistake.
So John, I don't know if that was your summary, but I have a follow-up question for you.
Yeah.
You don't have control of the pointer, but you could probably direct Marla or Delilah. Where is the appropriate, in your estimation?
I think one of them has already put in a green spot where our driveway is on Kimball Avenue, just what is that, northwest of where they're tying their street in. So right there.
Wait, guess I'm confused here. Let me zoom in a little bit. It's where the arrow is?
Yeah, where the arrow is.
That's where the current road ends up, right?
No. The current road ends up well closer to the intersection. It's it's way up there where the red arrow is.
So you're suggesting where the green dot is?
It's almost 400 feet.
Yeah.
The difference between where the current road is and where that driveway is.
So John, you're suggesting the split in between is more appropriate than where it currently is, where it's planned to be.
I'm saying yes. I'm saying we've got 600 cars today floating out of that location. If there was a natural spot to tie this, that's it. And it actually lands almost perfectly on their lot lines that you were pointing out earlier. So I don't see what the problem is with putting it there. I am open to conversations with Evan. We've had a conversation together. We have not finished engineering work on 40 to understand just how impactful this could be. But if everybody had to float up and through the yellow dotted spot, that's 40, to get into the exit lane to be able to turn left towards Williston up Kimball Avenue, it's a huge impact, because now you've got a street that you have to put in effectively in the front of it. Your building has to go behind that, and right behind that is the Potash Brook. So it's very impactful. And as we all know, we can't put parking in front of our buildings. So it's a big problem for 40 Kimball.
Okay. Thanks for that, John.
Yep.
Does the applicant wish to respond to that specific public comment?
Sure. So this is Evan again, and John and I did speak about this, and I certainly understand and am sympathetic to his concerns. Just so everybody's aware, there were sort of a host of reasons why it was located where it was. One of the discussions, or one of the reasons, was that we had a discussion with planning and zoning staff, I don't know, probably a year plus ago, about the distance that they would like, or it was included DPW and planning and zoning staff, about the distance they would like to see from Kennedy, and where we were locating it, they thought was appropriate for sight lines and from the distance of that existing intersection on Kimball and Kennedy, but also as you're traveling west on Kimball, and because you're going around a bend there. So from a sight line perspective, it made sense. From our site perspective, there is a lot of grade change there. And so jogging further to the east was beneficial to kill some of that grade off. And then again, specific to our site use, and this is, I'm sure John doesn't really care about this, but if we are to have a community scale grocery store on that corner, it does require, a certain parking standard. And so having that road further to the east also worked there. I think that, John and I had a productive conversation. As he pointed out, there was no resolution to it other than we provided him our CAD drawing, so his engineering team could take a look at it and see what the possibility was there. For what it's worth, we do own the land to the immediate east of John's lot. We are planning on using a portion of that for stormwater mitigation, but there is likely some room, if we shifted some things around, to add a little bit of space for an access onto that site. I don't know if that works. I don't know if that's the solution, but I think we're open to continuing to work with John and also the city certainly to figure out what is the right solution there. My question for for planning and zoning staff and for the board is, when I look at that corner on the existing development on the north side of Kimball Ave, there's 3 existing office buildings there, one of which is a mixed use and now has residential as a component of it. And then there's an existing undeveloped lot that John's referring to here. It would seem to me that the scale of development there would justify 2 curb cuts, particularly if the existing one became a right turn only, which is essentially what it is currently at rush hour traffic. And so therefore you'd have a relief valve on the intersection, assuming we could make that work and John had correct access, but then you'd have a relief valve also for traffic that was going west at rush hour times.
I think that, Evan, you're kind of bringing up new questions to me. I know you said that you talked to planning and zoning staff about this, but in a higher level conversation or a conversation I wasn't necessarily involved in. So those are questions I think we'd have to look into. I would say that our land development regulations generally discourage additional curb cuts. The board is dealing with this on another project right now. So I think that, with appropriate justification, the board has allowed more than 1 curb cut, and certainly retaining existing curb cuts is usually fine. So I guess the summary is that we have to look into it a little bit more.
Well, Marla, if there's a stoplight there, isn't it natural to come straight across? I mean, it's about a 5. Unlike Evan's side of the world, he has a lot of pitch on his side. We have maybe 5 feet of pitch on our side before you meet the 40 Kimball lot. So a curb cut makes sense. The problem for me is that it also eats up I mean, you can see the size of the drive that goes in front of the buildings. It eats up most of the parking lot that exists today, and behind the parking lot, it falls off and goes down to the Potash Brook. So we have, while I understand, I guess I keep coming back to, I understand where you're coming from, Evan. I would love to come to a simple agreement to it, but I've looked at the pitch. I can see your contour lines on here. There is not a significant difference between one and the other. It might be a foot, it might be 2 feet, but it's not significant. You're by pulling off sideways and coming across it. I get that you're cutting some of your pitch off, but in terms of what comes down to Kimball Avenue, they're very insignificant differences. What it really comes down to is a commercial use, and I don't think that's a reason for destroying our commercial use. So that's my take.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Yep.
Are there any other public comments before I turn it back to the board? Okay. Hearing none. Marla,
Matt?
what's your advice going forward here? What else do you need to hear before, or what else does the applicant need to hear?
Parting words of advice, I guess. I think that everything that we went through on the 7th was sort of wrapped up, not wrapped up, but the board's advice was provided as we went along. I think that the applicant has provided some good information for the board. Is there anything else that the board wants to see that hasn't necessarily got brought up? One thing that occurred to me is, this is totally a nitpick, but on what we're calling Master Plan 1, the project currently under development, there's a lot of overlap between phase names, and I think we need to be a little more careful this time that we don't sort of reuse the same phase names, and maybe the first one's called Master Plan 1 and it's called Master Plan 2, Phase 1A, etc. But it's becoming a little bit of an administrative challenge to keep track of all the different things. So
yeah, I concur with that.
We got that fixed. Yeah, I've got that feedback. We're gonna call it like Meadow. We're gonna call it.
Not nodding.
Like Meadow Phase. Meadow Phase, Townhome Phase. We've actual names, so it won't just be like this totally confusing Phase 1 of Phase 1.
Right.
I appreciate that.
Okay, if there's anything else from the board, then I'd say thank you very much, and perhaps we'll see a preliminary plat. I know we'll see you on something else regarding the other phase. Okay.
Yeah, this was
so now we move on.
really helpful, everyone. Thank you. I think we got a lot of really good feedback, and so hopefully we can knit it all together.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Evan.
All right, thank you all.
Okay, now we go to item 5, which is other business. Is there any other business that the board would like to bring up at this time? Hearing none, that concludes the Development Review Board hearing for April 28th. Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, all.
This conference is no longer being recorded.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
see you, Jen.